back down to earth and NASA and what's been going on since the 1950s. NASA's been around. It officially came into being around '54, I think, and a lot of its history in its foundings was basically Robert Goddard was originally, I would say, the founder of NASA. But it's mostly just Robert Goddard spent most of his life making missiles. He didn't get to go to the moon like Werner did, and basically just a military agency in flying missiles and stuff right up from the 1900s to even today's times. But there's back in the 1950s, there was a lot of research going on for, besides just going to the moon, most of it was going, well, we're going to make missions going to Mars, which is ironic because we hadn't even been in the moon yet. We hadn't even been in the 1950s. We hadn't even been in Earth orbit. One of the first researchers on that was Werner von Braun. He started in 1947, soon after he got over here. Before World War II ended, he took it was his engineering team that actually got us to the moon, and basically was mostly a German engineering team, and they took the V2 and they converted that into the Saturn V5, which eventually got us to the moon. But Werner started a study in 1947 called Das Project, and it was a fairly ambitious plan. They originally envisioned a crew of about 70 people, which was a pretty ambitious space agency. It's similar to what a fast attack submarine has, a crew of 88 men, so it's equivalent to what the U.S. Navy had on submarines during that time. But he also had plans for, since Mars has a weaker atmosphere than the planet Earth, so it creates a challenge. They didn't have a whole lot of information on Mars, but it creates a challenge in getting into going through the Martian atmosphere and not burning the spacecraft up or coming in too fast. It's kind of like flying a space shuttle from Earth orbit back into and landing it there on an air sprint when it's basically an asteroid on wings. But he planned on using gliders to glide through to the surface of Mars. The project itself was probably a carryover from when he was living in Germany, and the Germans did have a preliminary they were going to eventually plan on invading the UK. They were going to use gliders to go in, and it was probably a carryover from that project. It was never carried out, and he took his engineering team to America. But they did plan on using gliders, and that was part of this project. They were going to use gliders to cruise into Mars. So you can go through right up to the 1956. There was a in 1956 Werner did another research project on that, and he got his crew down to about 12. The biggest proposal for Mars was Stulager from NASA, and he proposed a crew of 200. He's about as close to a space program as similar if you've been watching the Battlestar Galactica show on TV. That was kind of what he was kind of proposing. He envisioned about 10 ships all heading out to Mars and having cargo ships and life support ships where they had huge greenhouses and stuff. But here again, there's always a lack of financing and stuff, and to get these early going, you'd have to have basically a new government. It's just, today's government's a product of Woodrow Wilson, and it's not the progressive government that what Teddy Roosevelt had through the 1800s up until 1901, I think, when Woodrow Wilson put the government under a budget and then put the Federal Reserve out there, which kind of squeezed off the cash for projects. There's nothing really, that was basically the end of the ambitious space program. Is when that party ended, basically, because it just doesn't produce enough revenue to create that kind of a space agency. It basically just squeezes off cash, and there's a lot of government infrastructure projects and stuff. You know, they're having problems in Detroit with their water. There's just a lot of government infrastructure projects that aren't going to be handled under the type of government we have in today's times. Filing a tax return, you know, putting the government under a budget, filing a tax return, it doesn't promote the government, you know, and then raising taxes, and nobody likes the taxes raised, you know. And some people, a lot of people, that's all they ever see of the government is the police department, so, you know, that doesn't promote government either. So it's kind of been a setback. I mean, there's a whole bunch of proposals between 1947 and 1972 by mostly America, NASA, and the Soviet Union. The Russians' biggest problem they had in their space program is they didn't have Microsoft, they didn't have Intel, and they had good engineering, but they didn't have the high-tech information technology they really needed to get to Mars. A lot of that stuff that they used to go to the moon and with NASA was you know, early software programs and stuff that they were able to actually do that, and Russia really was under an embargo, economic embargo, and they didn't have that. It's not that they didn't have good engineering. The Soyuz spaceship is a very reliable spacecraft. It's just they didn't have they didn't have Intel, they didn't have Microsoft, they didn't have a lot of the high-tech stuff they needed to actually finish their projects that they had planned. Also, throughout that time period, there was an engineer that wasn't mentioned in these research studies, which I thought was kind of interesting, was Gerald O'Neill. Gerald O'Neill also had an ambitious space program, not necessarily going to Mars, but he created the mass driver, which was going to be a part of a lunar base. They were going to create a lunar base. If you saw the Space 1999 TV series, that Moon Base Alpha, that was kind of what they had in mind. That's what Gerald O'Neill had in mind. He created a mass driver. What they were going to use that for is to launch spacecraft off of the moon, since it has low gravity, and it would run just like an aircraft carrier. It would cycle out at a high rate of speed. An astronaut could shoot a ship off the moon without having to actually use up a lot of propulsion. So, as far as when George Bush was in office, he initiated the new plan for NASA to create a space base on the moon. Ken Obama got in the White House. He canceled it, said that we'd already been to the moon. So I don't know why he canceled it. I was kind of surprised. You know, I thought, you know, Ken Obama not wanting to go to the moon, you know, or put a space station out there. I don't know. I don't know why he canceled it. You know, but it was a pretty ambitious new program, and you know, so that ended that. And with Donald Trump in the White House, I don't know, he has beefed up NASA's budget a little bit. I don't know what the plans are now. Back in the 90s, we had the Mars Society, which I joined, trying to raise public interest in going to Mars. But the biggest problem they have is they don't have a media that they can actually they should have put a federal media out there to promote government programs and stuff, like NASA and stuff, besides depending on the news networks. Back in the 60s and stuff, yeah, it was a big event for the news networks. They did get coverage. They didn't really have to make a whole lot of case for it because it was something new. I remember my dad putting me in front of the TV when I was a kid. I was in my diapers and didn't even know what I was looking at. And he was, Neil Armstrong and John Glenn were on the moon and they were jumping around, and I was in my diapers watching it. My dad was holding me up to the TV, and I'm like, well, I didn't see what the big event was at that time. I'm like, I was only a kid, but as you get older and stuff, you start getting the data and stuff, and there's a lot of good information that was coming back. There could have been more. So on the moon regolith that they brought back, they did bring some lunar rock back. They didn't do a whole lot of archaeological investigations. There's a big meteor that they found on the moon. It's like the cigar asteroid. They had a rover that they had, a four-wheel rover, a car. If they put a jackhammer or something over, like similar to what the space agency, the Canadian Space Agency created for the International Space Station, if they had some kind of attachment to that and put a jackhammer up that meteor, and they could run the jackhammer into that meteor and break off huge chunks and stuff with it, that meteor really should have had a little bit more investigation. The astronaut that went out to it was one of the last ones on the moon was Pete Cernan, I think. But he just took some close-up pictures of it and stuff. I don't think they brought back anything. But the cigar asteroid is of interest. They should have done. Astronauts staying on the moon can't hold a power jack. It would rock him off his feet. But I mean, if you had something attached to those four-wheel rovers, they could have actually done a little bit of archaeological work via like some kind of having a hand hoist or something like that. They could have attached to four-wheel vehicles. But there wasn't a whole lot of. They should have done a little bit more archaeological stuff. There wasn't part of the mission planning, just bring back some rocks and stuff. Some of the new things that have come up since the 1950s is nuclear electric propulsion They've got that on they've got nuclear reactors they've condensed down to, they can use now on the space station, so it's got good power and stuff. But the problem they have in space travel is they still use chemicals and stuff for their propulsion. And they have to bring that along with them. And the problem with it is that stuff can explode. So it creates a danger to the crew. They did have one explosion on one of the Apollo missions coming back, and the astronauts survived. But that's one of the problems with using propellants to propel a craft. Their nuclear space program still burns propellants. Is one of the problems, and it's not what I would have envisioned for propulsion. I would have envisioned some kind of pulse ram or something that would create a kind of a field that they could shoot out the back and for propulsion and propulse actually have a solid propulsion system that doesn't depend on bringing stuff aboard. They can run out of propellant. That's one of the problems, the dangers of going to Mars. A propellant, or it could actually explode. So they don't. When we were in submarines, we had a nuclear reactor, and we always had power, and we always had a propulsion. We never had to rely on that. We always had a corkscrew that we could run from the nuclear reactor. and so that was never a problem. And that's a good space station, a good spacecraft. That shouldn't be a problem. You should have some kind of propulsion system that you can rely on. Doesn't involve you bringing a whole lot of propellant on board, which could explode. And it's not. But that's not what they never have developed. One of the things, Richard Nixon's the one that basically canceled the plans for going to Mars in 1969. It was about I guess it was out of the Vietnam War, and there's a lot of more military spending. NASA, the military's budget for NASA is about 2%, so it's a very small portion of the military's budget, but a lot of that was being shuttled into the Vietnam War. So Richard Nixon basically canceled the Mars missions in '69. Studies for human Mars missions, 1982 through 1989, still basically the U.S. and Russia. By 1989, it was still basically two space agencies. I found it interesting, though, in '87, Sally Ride, I didn't know this, but she did a research study for a Mars mission, and there's not a whole lot of information on it, but I thought it was kind of interesting that she was one of the first females astronauts in space, but she actually did do a research study for a Mars mission. So I didn't, a lot of that just doesn't get a lot of public news and stuff. They should have had a federal broadcasting station that aired all over the United States, that anytime you put a government project out, you can see what your government's done with their tax money and stuff, and what the Army Corps of Engineers is doing. They broadcast on YouTube. So you can go to YouTube, you can go to the Army Corps of Engineers, then you can go to the different government agencies. They broadcast on YouTube, but they never had a federal broadcast station, and they should have had one a long time ago. TV's been around since the 1940s. But they never developed that wing of the government where they could actually promote projects. It's important to have projects because engineering is what grows an economy, and it's basically what an economy basically evolves around it. In one section, the other part of the economy is the agrarian side, which is basically food production. So without engineering, the other wing of the economy doesn't grow any. I mean, it's basically where it creates jobs and stuff. So that's one of the important aspects of keeping these projects going and promoting government projects, because it gives engineers something to do. 1991 through 2015, they were making proposals for Mars missions, and here again it's basically, I see Russia and Germany and Austria, And the crew size for all those missions, it was roughly between 6 to 4 people. The era they're going to put Battlestar Galactica up there basically ended, and now it's just going to be small crews that they're going to put up there. Basically, it's because of this lack of financing. I have a solution to that, but it would require a little bit of a new government. There are pragmatic rationales for the author's rationales for having a space program. Economic benefits, I've covered that. Contributions to national security. About 68% of the missions up there by the space shuttle were military missions, basically just spy satellites, and some was commercial communication satellites. So they were getting money from that. They would cut costs of running the space shuttle, but they're still basically military missions. Contributions to national stature and international relations. I don't know about international relations. It did bring Russia and the U.S. back together again. It's the peak of the Cold War. We had You know, they were manufacturing ICBM, we were, and he had the astronauts meeting up there on the Mir space station, so it did get some kind of cooperation, but it's basically just the two Germanys meeting up there. And what's happened since then is, since the 1990s, you've got several emerging space agencies. You got India, you got People's Republic of China that has the ability to go up there, and you have also South Korea has a launch facility, and so there's several countries now that have space agencies that have the ability to deliver people up there. Inspiration for students and citizens to further science and engineering education. I would agree with on that, but it's going to require a new government to better finance these kind of programs, and that hasn't happened so far. Contributions to science. Astrobiology is a new field that contributes to. So it does. We get data back from exploration, and I think instead of finding really life out there, you're going to find more history, and archaeology needs to be more of the investigative unit out there to see if there's any fossils we find in the asteroids and stuff out there, and we can get data back. I don't think all those asteroids and stuff, its whole history is it rotated around the sun. They came from somewhere else, and that's the hypothesis of mine, but I think I'm pretty much accurate because I know that ET is active out there. It's based on the assumption that ET is active out there and has the ability to move stuff. And when ET arrived, back a billion years ago, when they were putting the suns out there again and stuff, they can move rock around. So it would be, doesn't mean we'd never find any kind of fossils on asteroids and stuff, or even on Mars, because I don't think those origins of those planets, their whole life is spent revolving around our sun. They have history in other places too that could have been moved around. So it would contribute to that data to be able to do more archaeological research on those out there in space. Eventual survival of human species. They don't have that space agency out there yet. They don't have a propulsion system that can take them out of the solar system. That hasn't emerged yet. They're still using propellant, and propellant requires them having to carry it on a spaceship. And what's happened recently, the newest propulsion device is the ion engine, which basically burns steady. It's like Galactica. You see a steady burn in the back here for propulsion, but it still uses propellant. It uses a nuclear reactor to burn that fuel, and it's a steady burn. It's what they call a low propulsion device. I mean, it's just a steady burn, and you got it, and you can get out there and cruise, but it still uses propellant. It's not an inlet. You can't go really leave the solar system because you have to be able to get back too, and you don't have you can't carry an endless supply of propellant with you. You have to have some other means, something reliable means of propelling the ship you can stay out there 3 or 4 or 5 years in space and reach another star. The closest star from where we're at is, I think, about 2 light years. So you would still have to have at least 2 years propulsion to get there, and then 2 years to get back. And you can't rely on propellant. You have to have something else to be able to do that, and that hasn't happened yet. Shared human destiny. Well, that's been kind of an aspiration to explore. The moon shots and stuff were good for the aspiration to explore, but they didn't include the U.S. Navy. They put the U.S. Air Force in charge of NASA, and it's not. All it is basically defense of the United States, and they're just fighter pilots. It's just 1 or 2 men up there in a fighter, a plane, And it's not really it's not getting a whole lot of people involved. It's just 2 fighter pilots. What's really the space agency out there is the U.S. Navy. You got aircraft carriers, you got huge crews and stuff. And shared human destiny would involve getting the Navy involved in it. And if you're out there, Joe, 72% of this country is blue collar trades. I know a lot of professional people. They have science, science. Well, I know a physicist, which is my cousin, and he's never worked in physics because we just don't have enough. There's not enough research and grants and whatever else. And all he did is brick in houses his whole life. So he never used it. It requires a new government, and to get people up there, they have to see themselves being up there. You can go. That was one great thing about the Navy is it involved. You can get on an aircraft carrier that's got 145, 200 people on board, and if you're working on construction or in some blue collar trades, and you got a kid that you want, say, hey, if you want to be out there and you want to see the world and stuff, you just join the Navy, and you get 2 years of training, and you can do that. That's what NASA should be. The space program should be too. There's arguments against that, but the military's basically run the space program from the beginning. I mean, it's been a military. It's just research and development was only part of the program. They went on the ride together, but I could give you good examples of where it could have been in research. When I was in submarines, a lot of time we were just cruising around out there with no clear mission. Every once in a while the admiral would do a broadcast to us, say, hey, the Russia's still the enemy and stuff, and that's the reason why y'all are out here and stuff. But other than that, it was basically just cruising around with no clear mission being out there. What I would have liked to have used the submarine for is exploration out there, and turning on the active sonar and pinging at certain places out there in the ocean. We did come across some strange stuff out there, which if I was the officer of deck, I would have taken I would have given the order to go active and do a little bit of investigation. They weren't allowed to do that, and the officers out there they weren't intellectuals. And the only officer that was an intellectual was a lieutenant, and he never made any past a lieutenant. Those officers don't get promoted. They're just, it's strictly focused on a military program and stuff. And to me, it seemed like to me, they could have used some of the submarines for that. But my officers out there, I was one of the few guys on the ship that actually read books. A lot of them didn't, and my lieutenant didn't get promoted, so he's the one that he supported that. But they're not the admiral. They don't get promoted to admiral. They don't get promoted to captain. So that's all the submarines out there for. It's aircraft carriers the same way. Aircraft carrier could easily be Battlestar Galactica. It doesn't mean they're going to war. There's no clear enemy out there in outer space. They are getting some indicators that ET is out there, and there is a wicked witch out there. You can't arrive. I mean, it's not like we don't have any defense interest for defending the planet Earth, but it's not as clear as it. All we've seen of the extraterrestrial is drones flying around occasionally on the planet. Other than that, they had Project Blue Book. They had different investigations, but that's about it. The political motivations, the international partners is part of that. I would agree on that. Now, I told you we'd have several international space agencies now. they're not doing a whole lot of appeals over China, but I mean, they should, just because it's a regime still. You know, they should open the hand up, let them come in and ride on the International Space Station too. They put a preliminary space station up there with their space program. So, you know, they're developing there. They have gone on the moon. What was it called? The Lutu rover. It was kind of a semi-failure. It didn't stay active, but you know, you learn, and you know, I think they plan on going back to the moon. So, you know, they're behind what we are, but I mean, they still do have an active space program. And personally, I think they should be welcome on the International Space Station. There's no reason why they shouldn't be up there. Oh, here's the expenses for 2013. We're getting pretty recent. 19,770,000 U.S. Usually it's Russia, U.S. are the biggest expenditures on space. France is mostly satellites. They don't have a ability to launch up there, but they do have ability to launch satellites. Feels like China does have the ability to get people up there. Japan has the ability to launch satellites. Brazil has the ability to launch satellites. South Korea has the ability to launch stuff that's of a heavy enough payload that they can go to the International Space Station. So that is a good backup. You know, they do have the ability to launch heavier payloads. Spain is basically using it for satellites. Belgium and Kazakhstan basically they're using it for satellites too. So, you know, there's only about 4 space agencies out there that can actually put people up there. As far as the private sector goes, Bill Gates is has invested in Cometa. Jeff Bezos, he's is invested in Blue Origin. Larry Page is invested in Planetary Resources. But number one is Bill Gates, and so he does have an interest up there. So you got some billionaires. Paul Allen's also interested up here. He's Scale Composite, Strato Launch Systems, Vulcan Aerospace. So there's some privatized, some billionaires that do have an interest in going up there. You know, so that's a good thing because they got money and they can also they can push that with some political power too. Mao Hu-Tang, he's Satellogic Moon Express. Sheldon Adelson, Space Illinois. It's company's casinos. Elon Musk, SpaceX. Eric Schmidt, Google, Planetary Resources. Richard Branson has also put money out there for Virgin Galactic. He's had problems with his space plane. They did wreck, killed two pilots, and Yuri Milner, Planet Labs, and Breakthrough. So there are some billionaires that are interested in going up there. So it's not like a Jack Kennedy will run for the White House and stuff. We do have some billionaires that have an interest. So it's, you know, it's not like you won't have a Jack Kennedy or with an ambitious space program plans not be able to push that through up there, because there are some billionaires that do have an interest up there. The composition of Mars' atmosphere. And one of the problems when they get out there is what we've learned about the Mars atmosphere. It's 95% carbon dioxide, so it's not something we can breathe. And 1.93% argon, you got some nitrogen, it's only about just a very little oxygen. Carbon monoxide, water, you get a little bit of water, nitrogen oxide, neon, heavy water, krypton, and methane. It's got a lot of minerals though on Mars. So the advantage of since Mars does have a lot of minerals, is that they can use that there's a new piece of technology that's critical to that is 3D printing. I talked about that in the previous lecture. Is they have the ability, it's going to have to be modified, it's going to be a little bit more advanced because they have to be able to take minerals and resources and stuff from Mars and metals and convert that, utilize it, process it, and throw it into a 3D printer. And what they can use that for is they can create a base from it. They can, if something breaks down, they can use Mars as natural resources. So if you're looking for a space-faring nation, as far as ET goes out there in the universe, that's one of the things you're going to find on a spaceship. I guarantee you, is there's going to be some kind of 3D printing. It's not like we aren't getting something equivalent to what ET would have out there. 3D printing is part of it. They'll have an advanced, more version of it. I talked about that in my previous lecture, but it still operates on the same principle. And 3D printing is part of it because it's a backup. You can use a planet's resources to create, to fix a spaceship, space station, or a moon base or whatever. You have to be able to use, and you can, all they do is e-print it, 3D print it. So, that is a piece of technology that I guarantee you'd find on any spaceship, whether it's Battlestar Galactica or even Star Trek. It wasn't part of the TV series, but I guarantee that you would find a 3D printer on the Starship because they have to be able to make fixes in outer space. They have to be able to do that. So it's critical. Composition of Mars regolith. Yeah, here again, it's 42%. Oxygen, 3.2% sodium. Now you get into the minerals: magnesium, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, chloride, potassium, calcium, titanium. Titanium is one we could use. Chromium, we could use that. Manganese is a mineral. Iron we could use, 15.2% iron. Nickel we could use. So there's plenty of resources that they could e-print out. They used to e-print. They just have to have the ability to siphon that through a screen of some kind and run it through an e-printer. And that won't be too hard to do. Somebody out there will figure that out, how to do that, and it actually would create the ability to use natural resources out there. Also, water. There is some water out there. There was a picture of a crater located in the Stetis Borealis at 70.5 degrees north. They had a nice, pretty blue piece of liquid there, and something like what you would see in Alaska or up there in the Antarctic. And I can't really explain how they, but it's a good indicator of water being out there. So they could actually process oxygen through it, so as a backup. So there's some water on Mars that they could actually they could use to as a backup, just in case they had problems. They could it can be used as a backup. So it's not like they're just going to a totally dead planet. They can use for as a backup. This book I've got here, we're getting into stellar evolution. There's a lot of stellar evolution. A lot of the prevailing phenomena out there, a lot of this is based on stellar evolution. I don't agree with the authors. Pushes Mars back to being 4.57 billion years old, and that's how long most of its history it was rotating around the sun. I don't think that's the history of Mars, but they're stellar evolutionists, and they divided up into two periods when they thought there was life on Mars. They haven't found that yet. The Opportunity rover did find a gray mesodic hematite that does indicate presence of liquid water on Mars. But that doesn't indicate there's a requirement for life for life to exist. It's not just water. We have the Dead Sea out there in the Middle East, and there's nothing living out there. It's liquid water. We have the Great Salt Lake there in Utah. You can actually walk on it, but there's no fish going to be able to swim around there. Requires more than just water. So even if there was water on Mars, doesn't mean there was any life in it. I mean, we have two good examples: the Dead Sea, and we also have the Great Salt Lake out there in Utah. And there's no fish swimming around out there. It's a Dead Sea. So that doesn't, just because there was water out there, doesn't mean there was ever any life on there. That's not the reason to go to Mars. thinking they were going to, you know. The basic thing, the biggest thing is survival of the human species, getting and getting our people up there and out there off the planet, just in case there was some kind of natural some kind of catastrophe or something like that. We need backups. We need a space station. We need to be on Mars. We need to be on bigger space stations. Gerard O'Neill, which isn't mentioned by the author of this book, had ambitious plans for huge space stations and stuff, and that none of that came into being. It's just, as I've said, you basically need a new government to be able to finance those big projects. But you know, getting our people in outer space is the biggest, and learning for the process of getting people up there, because the plant's survival, the plant's survival people depend on it. You know. But you have to go get people up there. Micrometeoroids out there in space, there's about 30,000 tons, 30,000 tons of interplanetary dust rain down on the Earth every year. And they never really explain where that comes from. They think it's from asteroids colliding out there. Well, if that's true, how often has any astronomer ever caught an asteroid colliding out there? I don't think there's a whole lot of collisions going on when they're rotating around the sun. There's not a whole lot of collisions going on. And I don't think there's any astronomer that's ever caught an asteroid colliding with each other out there. If you look at go to a rock tumbler, my great grandfather used to tumble rock. And you know, 2 weeks of tumbling, you can get the effect. Actually, about 2 weeks, you can get what an asteroid somewhere looks. And it's the constant tumbling and tumbling and tumbling of a rock, and you get equivalent to what you have on asteroids out there. No, when they're rotating around the sun, they're not going to get that much tumbling. They really don't have the good explanation as to why the asteroids look like they do out there, when there's not a whole lot of collisions occurring when they go around the sun. Their explanation is, it's not a good explanation, bottom line. But getting us up there, the Holman trajectory is one of the things that they use to chase the planets, and when they're launching and stuff. That's one of their main trig problems in when to properly launch a spacecraft, and especially on a Mars mission, with it going around the sun. You have certain periods when you can actually launch, and they have to be able to they'll launch in those windows. So it's not like they can launch anytime they want to. There are periods of time. Take a 3D printer, and what I'm looking at, it's called the Cartesian machine and spherical machine. They're basically running a 3D printer off like the arm that's on the International Space Station, the Canadian arm, and you could actually just put it, mount it to Mars, and you could actually operate it by remote, and you could actually build up a wall and to create a base. So it's making lunar bases in Martian basins, makes it feasible, and it's also low risk to the astronaut, because the astronaut doesn't have to go out there and run brick and mortar and stuff, or do anything that's going to overexert him and cause him to breathe in too much oxygen and pass out. Astronauts really can't do that kind of work outside the planet Earth, because they're depending on oxygen. If they breathe too much oxygen, they're going to pass out, which is a risk to themselves and also the crew out there, because then they have to send somebody else to go get him, and it's not safe work for an astronaut. You have to depend on some kind of robotics and hydraulic robotic devices out there that they can operate by remote and do that kind of work. So, 3D printing is actually picking that up to what they can build to do out there. There's a habitat designed by Team Loggia Hive, 3D printed habitat. It kind of looks like an igloo. That's 3D printed, but it makes it possible to build something like that out there on Mars, and it's low risk to the crew. There's a list of stuff that you have to have out there. One of the big things that's missing on the International Space Station is a greenhouse. They've been taking some plants out there, but when they designed the space station, I don't know that it wasn't the space station out there now has been. They had budget cuts and stuff, so some of the stuff that they put out there didn't make it. I don't know if a greenhouse is ever in the plans, but it's critical research and be able to put a greenhouse out there that can produce enough oxygen that you can survive out there on the space station without oxygen generators and stuff. And they do have a system, but those do break down. We had that on the submarine, and the only problem with those is it recycles air. It's very stagnant. You need something like plants and stuff to purify air, and you can't depend on oxygen generators because those do break down. And if you're on the way to Mars and stuff, and one of those does break down, you're in a world of hurt. So they need some kind of greenhouse compartment where the plants have the ability to produce enough oxygen and recirculate the air that they don't have to depend on oxygen generators. It's basically a backup. But it also, oxygen generators just don't. The air gets real still. In the Navy they do blows. You go up to the surface and bring in fresh air because the air gets real stagnant. I don't know if the astronauts are mentioning any of that, but I mean, when they're on the space station, the space station's been up there for years, and some of that, the air just keeps recycling and stuff. But you get smells up there and stuff, and it just recycles and recycles and recycles. It's not real fresh air. You have to have plants up there. So that was one of the weaknesses of the current International Space Station is they don't have they don't have a unit they should have put up there where they had a big enough greenhouse up there they could put up there that would they could survive, that they could survive off that as far as the space station goes, because it would be a backup, because they don't have any other backup. Otherwise they just have to jump in their soil spacecraft and head home until they get a repair crew up there. And it's they don't have any backups, so they should have put a greenhouse module. It should have been part of the International Space Station, but they were doing budget cuts, and it basically required new government out there to be able to put that kind of space station up there. But that was something they were missing in their space station design. Medical faculties, they got a lab up there. It's not like they don't have that up there. Storage space, they got plenty of storage space up there. That's the critical thing. They got a solar storm shelter, but the critical thing is the greenhouse. That hasn't been fully tested up there. They've just been bringing plants up there to make sure they can survive, but that's not the same as having a greenhouse module up there where the space station can use that as a backup. Especially on a Mars space station, they would have to have a greenhouse out there. Here's a space station there. It's 78% nitrogen, 21% nitric, oxygen, zero carbon dioxide. Water vapor is about 1.0%, and trace elements, which we excel, the astronauts excel. So, that's basically what they're surviving on the International Space Station. Physical health of the astronauts, the effects of zero gravity. They haven't developed artificial gravity. They're going to have to come with some new theories. If you go to I think it's called the American Gravity Association, they're doing research on that, but they really need some new some new physics theories outside Newton's laws of gravity to be able to create artificial gravity. They just don't have the full program out there, and to create quantum gravity is going to require some new it's going to require some new physics theories and hypotheses that they don't have yet. But you can keep track of that on the American Gravity Association. There's a couple other research engines that are working on that, but it's still in the hypothesis, and they don't really have anything they can put out there, and they have no way of proving that they can actually do it yet. That's pretty much it for Mars. Mainly the reason we go out there is our survival, and it gives engineering. It creates more of a progressive government that's actually gives a society a reason to exist. I said one of the reasons in our history is that we eventually want to get the level of ET. One of the problems they had back in the 60s is everything was based on Darwin's theory of evolution, which said there's nothing living out there, and there's no space agency, and extraterrestrials just don't exist out there. And it's just based on evolution. And so there is no Star Trek. I remember a professor recently asked the class, what do you think heaven is? And about 80% of the class said, well, thought Star Trek was heaven. Civilization can do all that, and and the rest of it, well, going to a greenhouse, looking at going to a greenhouse or a botanical garden where there's lots of flowers and stuff. Some looked at that as being heaven. So, but the biggest problem is that they put stable evolution and Darwin's theory of evolution. So it doesn't give a society any reason to exist. And because of that, they promoted Darwin's theory of evolution and stable evolution right through the 60s and 70s and 80s and the 90s. And cocaine usage during that time went up to $6 trillion. It just doesn't give a society a reason to exist. It's not just about making money or owning a business or whatever. You have to have a reason for a civilization to exist, stages, and a reason in a progressive type government where you've got levels of knowledge and information and stuff, and you want to eventually return to being Star Trek, or open up an opportunity for us to actually find them out there and make contact. There's new evidence, and that's one of the basics of my research focus is proving that ET is out there in the universe, and some of that's already come up as far as detecting high energy waves and stuff going through arriving from galaxies and stuff. It may be communication they're picking up on radio telescopes, but it could be there was a wow signal they picked up. It could have been an ET communication up out there, but there is some of the indicators that they're proof of ET's existence out there. So that's the reasons why for society to gives a reason for society the first way to exist is you want to rediscover what we lost out there. Oh, that is this lecture.